Hi, friends. Fall is in full swing in my part of the country, and we've officially crossed into October. For the month of October, Foggy Oak Fairy Tales transforms into Foggy Oak Scary Tales, where I bring you kid-friendly, scary, or Halloween-related stories to celebrate the spookiest month of the year. If you're not a fan of scary stories, no worries. We'll be back with our normal Foggy Oak Fairy Tales in November, and you can join us then or listen to past episodes of the podcast instead. We're beginning this year's Foggy Oak Scary Tales with an adaptation of the Grimm's fairy tale Godfather Death, published in 1812 in the first edition of Kinder- und Hausmarchen, Children's and Household Tales, as tale number 44. This is a tale of love and greed and loss, and when I originally planned it for the podcast a few years ago, my children informed me that it was too scary for the normal rotation. The spookiest, scariest part of this story is towards the end, after our main character defies death to save the life of a princess and faces justice for his choice. Join me, if you dare, for our first Foggy Oak Scary Tale of the year. Once upon a time and long ago, a poor farmer found himself at the crossroads outside of town in the dead of night. The night was still, eerily so, with only the barest sliver of moon to light his vigil. Unlike many an unlucky traveler who found themselves at a crossroads during the witching hour, he was there on purpose. Earlier that very evening, his wife had borne a son. And not just any son, for this tiny baby was their 13th child. And everyone knew that strange things happened to 13th children. Sometimes the fairies would take them and leave a changeling in their place to torment and terrify the family. Sometimes the child would simply vanish, gone from the earth as if they had never existed. Some developed strange powers, sometimes good, sometimes evil. So he and his wife had agreed long before the birth that things could not be left to chance. The child needed protection, powerful protection. They had agreed that the very evening of the child's birth, the father would go to the crossroads and seek a godfather for this child. The most powerful godfather he could find, to provide the most powerful protection. So the farmer waited, with a patient determination and patent lack of fear that intrigued the surrounding magical folk and powerful beings. Many began to vie for the opportunity to speak to the man first and offer their protection as godfather. But in this time of magic, there were also gods, and the farmer's attitude was interesting enough that it had attracted even their interest. In this particular land, and at this time, the most revered of these was the god King El, who was held to be the father of all other gods and magical folk and creatures on earth. Although El could be mercurial and unpredictable, it pleased him to imagine granting this humble, brave farmer the ultimate beneficence of his protection as the child's godfather. With a bold flash of lightning and a great clap of thunder, El appeared before the farmer in the crossroads, dimming his divine glory somewhat so that it would not utterly overpower the man.
"Well, mortal, do you know who I am?"
El demanded.
"I think, Lord, that you are El, father of gods and man,"
the farmer carefully replied while he bowed low to the god before him.
"It is well that you know me," El boomed. "I have come to take your child as my godson, and grant him all the boons that come thereof." "My lord, you honor us," the farmer said. "But how may I know that selecting you as his godfather will serve him best in this cold, cruel world? For he is a 13th child and needs particular care."
As he spoke, the farmer could see El becoming more and more outraged, like a tea kettle that was about to boil over.
"You dare to question me when I offer your son a prize greater than any I have ever granted a mortal before. Happiness, health, a long and satisfying life. These things and more are his as my godson. But you are father to men, and all men do not have these things, the farmer retorted. There is poverty and sickness and unhappiness all around me. If this is so for so many others to whom you are an actual father, then why would I choose you, who protects only my son, and condemn so many others to misery? Choose me? Elle shouted. You do not choose me. I had chosen to grant my inimitable patronage to your child, and you dare to stand in judgment of me? To the devil with you! And with a terrible clap of thunder that shook the ground, Elle was gone. My father has a fearsome temper, does he not? The silky voice curled out of the shadows by the side of the road. And who might you be then? The farmer inquired. I should have thought it was obvious, since he sent you right to me in his wrath, the creature replied as it stepped out of the shadows and into the dim light of the moon. The devil, then? The farmer said. What do you want with me? For I've no time to waste in my task, angry though your father may be. But of course, I only came to alleviate that particular burden. For if you will not have my father, you surely will have me. For I can offer you all those things my father would not promise. Gold, adventure, all the delights and pleasures of the world that he so often keeps from those poor and unhappy folk you rightly chided him with. The farmer felt the devil's tail curl about his waist, trying to draw the farmer into the vision it was laying out. That may be true, and then again it may not, for you are well known to the world as an inveterate liar and deceiver of men, the farmer remarked. I would not have you for my child's godfather any more than I'd have your own father. So saying, the farmer grabbed the tail that was wound about his waist and pinched it forcefully. Well, I never, the devil huffed, snapping its tail back so hard that it cracked like a whip in the still night. You and your son will never get an offer from the likes of me again. And this time, in a puff of sulphurous smoke that made the farmer cough and hack from the fumes, the devil vanished. And I hope we never do get an offer from the likes of you again, the farmer muttered once he regained his breath. He collected himself and calmly resumed his wait. Perhaps, a soft voice said, you should seek a godmother instead. A new being appeared beside him without fanfare, materializing with a gentle rasping noise, like dried leaves rustling through a forest in the fall. You, my lady? The farmer asked. Who or what are you? And what do you offer my child? You will know me as Death, she said, and I will make no promises to you. You will make no promises to me, but of all the creatures I have met this night, you are the only one who treats everyone as equals without discrimination, rich and poor alike. We all must meet you in the end. That is true enough, Death agreed. Will you have me for your child's godmother, then? She asked. My lady, I will, the farmer said, extending his hand. The farmer and Death shook hands, and Death was gone, departing with that same sound of gently rustling leaves. As the boy grew, he knew Death only as his beloved godmother, who came to see him at least once a week throughout his childhood. She took him to secret places in the hills and forests near his home that only she knew, and taught him the properties and uses of the many plants, mushrooms, berries, herbs, and other such things that grew in the region. He was a fast learner and soon proved adept at healing,
helping to nurse many of his family's farm animals and occasionally some of his siblings back to health. It gradually became clear that the boy was likely to become a renowned doctor, tending to the sick and wounded of the world. And so things stood. When the boy came of age, his godmother took him on what he thought was another of their forest adventures. This time, though, she led him deep into the woods, further than they had ever been before, into the ancient heart of the forest. They came to a clearing where the ground was covered in delicate purple blossoms of a flower he had never seen. "My child," Death said, "you have grown into a caring and skilled young man, already respected in your community for your healing skills. You have learned well in our lessons, and it is for your hard work and noble character that I grant you this gift upon your majority." Death gestured to the flowers in the glen. "If all other remedies have failed for a person in your care, and your patient is near death, I will appear beside their bed. If I stand at the person's head, you will give them this flower, ground into a tonic, and they will be cured. However, if I appear at the person's feet, they cannot be saved, and you must help them accept that they will die. Follow these instructions, and you will be as famous and respected as your care and skill deserve." The godson thanked Death and assured her that he would do precisely as she instructed. And, for many years, he did. He used his knowledge and medicinal skills to heal any who came to him, as best he could, and for those he could not heal, he obeyed his godmother's instructions. About half the time, she appeared at the head of the bed, and he was able to save those patients. The other half of the time, she appeared at the foot, and he helped his patient and their loved ones understand that there was no cure and prepare for death. In this way, he became famous not only as a skilled physician, but as something of a prophesier who could predict whether someone would live or die, often bringing the gravely ill back to miraculous health. Often, but not always. There was happiness and there was grief, but most importantly for Death, the balance between life and death was maintained. By now, the young man was well known enough that when the king fell gravely ill, the palace sent for him immediately. Usually, there would be time for him to try other remedies and cures, but when the young man was shown into the king's chamber, he immediately saw his godmother standing somberly at the foot of the king's bed. There was no hope to be found here, and nothing to be tried. The king's fate was already sealed. Yet, the king had been a kind and generous ruler. He was known to be fair and just to his people, and he did not yet have an heir. If the king died, the land would be thrown into confusion and chaos as the various noble families went to war over the succession. The prosperous, happy land the young man had known would be washed away in a tide of needless suffering and bloodshed. His family, his parents, and 12 other siblings, they would all be put at risk. All those lives he had saved, all the people he had cared for. The young man thought of them all and decided he could not let the king die. Instead, he would trick Death. He strode into the room, refusing to make eye contact with his godmother. Instead, he instructed the many attending servants and nobles to spin the king's bed around. Confused, but willing to try anything at this point, they obeyed. When the heavy four-poster bed was finally rotated, Death, who was looking more and more surprised, found that she was standing at the king's head and not his feet. The godson finally looked into his godmother's eyes as he declared, "The king will live." He prepared the flower tonic and gave it to the king, who instantly improved. Death gave her godson a furious glare and vanished without a word. The young man continued to care for the king for several days. By the third day, the king was entirely healed and back to ruling from his throne room. He called the young man to him and rewarded him with a noble title and lands near the palace, in thanks for saving his life. The young man departed for his new home and arrived to his very own manor house that evening as the last rays of the sun were disappearing below the horizon. A gust of wind swept over the courtyard, and the sound of rustling leaves. "Godmother?" the young man asked the air, nervous. "Godson," she said in a cold voice, "you have broken our agreement and tricked me into saving the life of a mortal who should have come to my realms instead. You have disrupted the balance between life and death." "Godmother, I am sorry," the young man began, but the figure who appeared before him was not the gentle, loving godmother he had known. Her voice was now an angry hiss, and her features held none of the warm affection he was used to seeing when they were together. "For the love I bear you, this one chance I will give you," Death interrupted. "Trick me again, and it will be your own life I take." Before he could respond, she was gone. The young man fully intended to heed his godmother's warning. Yet, at every critically ill patient he visited over the next several months, he found his godmother at the foot of the bed. It was hard telling all of those patients that they were to die. It was hard not being able to save any of them. He understood that he had disrupted the balance between life and death, but surely after so many months, it ought to be returning to normal, shouldn't it? It did not seem that his godmother thought so. He struggled on, doing his best for those who were not seriously ill, and attempting to accept his godmother's verdict for all the others. One fiercely cold winter morning, when the sun had barely crested the horizon, the young man was awoken by a fierce pounding on the door. A messenger had come from the palace. It seemed the king's daughter had taken ill, and the king bade him come at once to tend her. He rushed out into the frigid air, mounted his horse, and galloped towards the castle to see what might be done. When he arrived, the king himself met the young physician at the gates. She was his beloved eldest child, and of age to wed and bring an heir to the kingdom, he explained. If the young man could heal her, he would have her hand in marriage and join her in ruling the land after the king. The young man's heart leapt in sudden excitement. He could do more good and live in greater comfort as king than he ever could hope to as a physician, even a famous one. He bounded up the stairs, scarcely pausing to consider what he might find on the other side of the princess's door. When her servants opened the door to admit him, he came eye to eye with his godmother. His heart sank. She would not grant him a reprieve, even here, even when it mattered so much more to him than all the others. He frowned at his godmother and coldly turned his back on her, facing the worried servants instead. He ordered them to turn the princess's bed around, just as he had for the king. When the bed was oriented such that his godmother now stood at the head of the bed, he handed the princess the tonic he had already prepared and bade her drink. Color immediately flooded into her pale cheeks. Her eyes fluttered open, and she took the first clear breath she had had in hours. As the servants and nobles around her exclaimed in delight that she was saved, Death reached out to her godson and grasped his arm with a skeletal hand. Suddenly, the young man was no longer in the princess's bedchamber, but a massive cave, surrounded by hundreds of thousands of flickering candles. Each candle was at a different height, burned to different lengths. Some were tall and flickered strongly, while others were reduced to near puddles and guttered weakly in their own pooling wax. All this he took in within seconds. His godmother released him from her grasp, and he looked at her. Where before she had always appeared to him as a friendly-looking young woman, she was now only a skeleton, draped in tattered robes that tangled and dragged on the ground. Beneath her hood, her eye sockets glowed with a sickly green light. "Do you know where I have taken you, Godson?" she asked in a raspy hiss that bore no resemblance to her usually gentle voice. Godmother, I cannot guess," he stammered. "This is the Cave of Souls," she said. "Each candle represents a life. The tallest have many years left, and the others, well." She gestured to one of the melted candles that was rapidly guttering and lifted a scythe from a nook in the cave wall. Deftly, she swiped the scythe over the wick of the sputtering candle, extinguishing it instantly. "You disobeyed me again, Godson," she rasped into the silence. "The balance of life and death must be maintained." She moved forward, deeper into the cave. Drawn like a moth to a flame, her godson followed in her wake, nearly hypnotized. They walked for a long time, past so many candles that the godson felt there was no end, that he was wandering in a sea of wax and flame that had no terminus. Yet, finally, when he was exhausted from the effort of following her for so long, his godmother did stop before an alcove. There, a cluster of candles, 15 in all. "One for each of your family," Death commented. "See how your siblings are so tall and strong still, and your parents still have plenty of life left too." But his eyes were drawn to a candle at the end of that line, one where the barest hint of a flame hovered above a deep pool of wax. With horror, he realized it was his own candle. "Please, Godmother," he began, "can you not light me a new candle? I will do better this time. I will do great things as king. I will rule justly and kindly and honor you always." "I cannot. For any candle to be lit, another must go out," his godmother replied. "I am to be king," the young man insisted. "My parents, even my siblings, would understand what that means, what good I can do. Take one of their candles, pray, and give me a new one if you must. For surely the life of a king is worth saving." Recklessly, desperately, he reached out himself and attempted to grab one of the tall candles of a sibling. The rush of air created by his rapid movement caused the candles all around him to flutter and shift. As his hand closed around the taper of his sibling's candle, the young man had only enough time to see with horror that, while the other candles had enough wick left to sustain them in the burst of air, his own candle had been put out. The young man fell to the ground, dead. The smoke from his extinguished candle wisped gently into the air of the alcove, and then was gone. And Death turned and made her way out of the cave, leaving her godson where he lay. The end. That's it for our first installment of Foggy Oak Scary Tales this season. I hope you enjoyed the story. It is one of those Grimm's fairy tales that does not have a happy ending, and it is a little spooky. But I mostly find it sad that the young man betrayed his own values when he was tempted by ruling over others and the wealth that came with it. I can understand why he was tempted, and I can understand why his godmother had to follow through on her promise that if he broke his vow again, she would have to take his life. Would you have done things differently if you were the young man in the story? What if you were Godmother Death? I'm sure I will be thinking about that too. Stay tuned for the next Foggy Oak Scary Tale, which is not so scary and will cover a real-life pumpkin flood that happened at Foggy Oak Farm. In the meantime, you can check out our Instagram at Foggy Oak Fairy Tales or make my day by leaving a rating and review of the podcast on the platform where you listen. See you soon.